Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The shocks of the Asian financial crisis, the Enron crisis, the WorldCom scandals in the United States, Europe's creation of a common financial market, all these developments helped to build consensus for global accounting standards. And as you see here, we received support from all sorts of international organizations to develop a global language for financial reporting. The G20, the IMF, the World Bank, Financial Stability Board, IOSCO, Basel Committee, they all are on record with their support for this important project. So the question is, how are we in fact doing? Who is using our standards and how are they being adopted? And thus far we had a rough idea of progress based on our own knowledge and on our experiences with the large accounting firms. Still, up to now, our knowledge has not been very precise. And as a result, people often doubt whether progress has really been that great, has really been as great as we have thought. And some believe or like to believe that many countries have adopted locally modified versions of IFRS, and they claim that the use of unmodified IFRS around the world is actually quite limited. And this point of view is very popular in countries like France and the United States. So for these reasons, we felt it necessary to get a better understanding of which jurisdictions have adopted our standards and how. And for the last 9 months, our staff, led by former IASB member Paul Pector, normally here in Hong Kong, but currently in London. He has been working to compile this information. What we did is we began by conducting a survey among the accounting standards around the world. We then supplemented the survey results with information drawn from other sources, including securities regulators and the large accounting firms. And then finally we formed our picture and we asked the relevant authorities within each country or jurisdiction to validate our conclusions. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. And these are the first batch of jurisdictional profiles that we have created, and which are going to be published today on the IFRS website. These are 66 countries, jurisdictions. They include all the members of the G20 and a further 46 jurisdictions that have responded to our initial survey request. A lot of countries simply did not respond yet. For example, 13 EU members, of which we know they are full IFRS adopters, are not yet included on this list. What we will do from now on is we will again approach these countries that have not yet responded, including these 13 EU member states, and we hope to end up with a comprehensive picture of the IFRS world very soon. But there are already a lot of conclusions that we can draw on the basis of these 66 countries, and the results are indeed extremely encouraging. First of all, what is apparent, and that is not all that surprising, is that there is almost universal support for IFRS as the single set of global accounting standards. 95% of the 66 jurisdictions have made a general public commitment of support to a single set of global accounting standards. And then furthermore, with the exception of Switzerland is always a country which has its own way of doing things, every jurisdiction stated a belief that IFRS should be that single set of global accounting standards. And what is interesting, that this includes those jurisdictions that yet have to make a decision to adopt IFRS, including the United States. In the United States, lately there has been a lot of talk about, well, for the time being we should be happy with comparable global standards. The SEC, who answered our request, clearly said we want one single set of global standards and it should be IFRS. Then, looking a little bit deeper, 55 of the 66 jurisdictions, that is more than 80% of these profiles, report IFRS adoption for all, or in 5 cases, almost all public companies. And most of the remaining 11 non-adopters have made significant progress towards IFRS adoption. Countries such as Singapore, which is very close, and Indonesia, which has a little bit more way to go, still has to make an official commitment to IFRS, but all these countries have made important steps. And obviously that is a very remarkable achievement when you consider that this shift has happened in less than 10 years. Then what is also very remarkable, and contrary to what very many people believe, most jurisdictions that have adopted IFRS have made very few modifications to IFRS. And furthermore, most of these modifications, if they occur, are very limited. For example, the most notorious carve-out is the European carve-out on IAS 39. It has been used in Europe by fewer than 2 dozen companies out of a total of 8,000 listed companies in the European Union. And moreover, where such modifications have occurred, they are meant to be temporary arrangements in the migration from national GAAP to IFRS. And in almost all of these cases, we have active projects on our agenda that address these issues. Some of these issues are agriculture, which is very important in Malaysia and other Asian countries. Loan loss provisioning, that's for example important in Singapore and a country like Mexico. Macro hedge accounting, important in the European Union. Separate financial statements, which is a big issue in most Latin American countries. And revenue recognition, which especially the recognition of real estate projects is a big issue here in Asia. And on all these issues we have a work program going on, not to just accommodate, but because we felt that our constituents had a very good point and that our standards need to be improved on these issues. And the end result will be, after we have completed these projects, that most of these modifications are very likely to disappear. What is also interesting, it's not here on the slide, but there is an impressive uptake for the IFRS for SMEs, the IFRS for SMEs. More than half of all 66 jurisdictions have already adopted IFRS for SMEs, or are planning to do so in the near future. And this is all the more remarkable if you consider that the SME standard is less than 4 years old. So all this information will be available on the website from today, 7 hours from now probably. And I really encourage you to browse through these country profiles. You'll find a lot of interesting information on our website. So we can conclude that compared with other global standards, such as, for example, the Basel capital requirements for banks, the use of local adaptations of IFRS is very limited indeed. And the fact that most IFRS adopters seem to be able to resist the temptation to tinker with our standards is truly remarkable. And the question is, why should this be the case? And that is the question that I would like to answer in the second part of my presentation. First of all, I think that many of our constituents draw comfort from the fact that we have a highly developed due process. I'm telling you, I have had a long career in public service. I have never worked in an environment which is so transparent as the working environment of the IFRS. All our board papers and all our board meetings are accessible to the public. We have comprehensive requirements for comment periods, for outreach, so it is unlikely that we overlook issues raised around the world. And it is likely that a standard that has benefited from such elaborate due process, that it's more likely to be high quality and to stand the test of time. We recently created the Accounting Standards Advisory Forum. The first meeting was really a big success, a very high quality meeting. And by creating ASEF, we are further ensuring the inclusiveness of our standard setting. And through ASEF, we hope to get timely and insightful input to our standard setting. And that should further mitigate the risks of future non-endorsement of our standards. Secondly, the governance of the IFRS Foundation has improved markedly over time. The establishment recently of the Monitoring Board gave the IFRS Foundation a very firm public setting, which it needed. Our accountability to the Monitoring Board gives additional assurances that the IASB is not some sort of a free-floating ivory tower somewhere back in London. Of course, we were never an ivory tower, but this makes it definitely sure. And at the same time, this multilateral body of securities regulators, the Monitoring Board, it has reinforced the independence of the IASB from undue lobbying from one single jurisdiction, since it's composed of many jurisdictions. Thirdly, what I think is very important is that most constituents draw comfort from the fact that they have an endorsement mechanism in place. In almost all jurisdictions, these endorsement mechanisms are a simple yes or no decision to accept a standard. Rarely do they involve a process that is likely to lead to detailed adaptation of IFRS to perceived local needs. Yet these endorsement mechanisms are very effective in two ways. First, they create a safeguard as they leave ultimate sovereignty in standard setting in local hands, and that's a reassuring feeling. Secondly, the possibility of non-endorsement ensures that the IASB will have to listen very carefully to what its constituents have to say. And the fact that so few jurisdictions fail to endorse our standards as issued, it hopefully reflects the fact that we do listen well and that we make changes where they will lead to a better standard. Finally, I believe that it is the technical nature of accounting standards that makes them relatively easy, not to understand, but to accept. IFRS aims to achieve a neutral description of economic reality. And that is something different than, for example, the capital requirements of the Basel Committee, which aim to shape economic reality rather than to reflect it. They tell you what to do, they don't tell you just to reflect what's there. And that is inherently much more political than our standards. And of course it's true, as I have found out, that accounting standards are certainly not free of judgment, and they can be subject to fierce controversy. such as fair value accounting, to which Professor Chen just alluded. And sometimes, indeed, accounting standards can even become politicized, especially when they shed light on practices or risks that people would rather keep in the dark. Yet most accept that accounting standards are essentially technical rather than political. And for these reasons, most jurisdictions accept that the standard setting is best done by an independent board, provided that proper procedures for due process and accountability are in place. Despite all these safeguards, there are some who believe that rather than having a single global language of financial reporting, we should switch to a Basel style of global principles, which should then in turn be adapted and formalized in local standards, such as indeed is being done with the Basel Agreement. It has been translated in European legislation, for example. Some say it has been watered down. It is definitely a little bit different from the general principles that had been agreed. I think it should, if we would return to this way of doing, making our standards, it would be a recipe for disaster. In fact, this approach has been tried before in accounting, and it was no success. The IASB predecessor body, the IASC, developed accounting standards that were intended to serve as the basis for national accounting rules. And all that happened was that countries took those international standards that they liked and altered those that they did not like. And the end result was that after decades of trying, the international community had to admit defeat. And that this defeat in turn led to the creation of the IASB with a new mission of a single set of global accounting standards. Even when our constituents disagree with part of our standards, and almost everybody does, they almost always resist the temptation to alter them. Local adjustments are viewed with suspicion by the markets, by investors. So most jurisdictions will simply take IFRS in full. Also, most of our constituents accept that if local adaptations would become rife, the benefits of having global standards would evaporate. The financial crisis has demonstrated the need for rigorous economic standards that provide maximum transparency. And the country profiles show that IFRS has come a long way to provide transparency to investors around the world. And I think they are a cause for celebration about what has been achieved, as well as a yardstick on the work that we still have to do. But because, of course, there is quite a lot to do still. What is left to do? Well, for a start, it is very clear that there are some large and important economies that still have not adopted IFRS or have not fully adopted IFRS. But even in such countries, more progress is being made than many people are aware of. Japan already permits the use of IFRS. Currently, 17 of Japan's largest multinationals are using IFRS for domestic reporting. And the Japanese Business Association, the Kaidan Ren, has estimated that in the very near future, in the next 2 or 3 years, that number will increase to 60 Japanese companies reporting in IFRS. And that would represent roughly 20% of the market capitalization of Japan. And that is, of course, quite substantial. And contrary to what many think, the dynamics of IFRS in Japan are still quite strong. The Japanese are not just waiting for the United States. In the United States itself, the SEC's 2007 decision to permit non-US companies to report using IFRS while listing in the United States, it was a major game changer. Today, more than 450 foreign private issuers reporting using IFRS as issued by the IASB. and they represent together trillions of dollars in market valuation. So the use of IFRS in the United States is far from marginal. This, and the fact that US investors increasingly invest in the IFRS part of the world, explains why the American SEC remains very interested in progress being made by the IASB. And Paul Beswick, the chief accountant of the SEC, reaffirmed that earlier this week. China is also a very important country for us. It has chosen a strategy of convergence of its standards with IFRS for all of its listed companies. China has already made great progress and has reached substantial convergence with IFRS. There's still work to do, but we have to acknowledge that the Chinese had a lot of catching up to do. I was in China over the last 2 days. I visited the National Accounting Institute in Shanghai, and I was extremely impressed by the sophistication of the people there and the high quality of the questions that we received, which were not much different from the questions that we receive in other parts of the world. And the Chinese government remains firmly committed to the ultimate goal of full convergence with IFRS. Despite the enormous progress in adoption of IFRS around the world, we also understand, of course, that adoption in itself is not enough. Obviously, proper application of the standards is also extremely important. Proper application is primarily the responsibility of preparers, of auditors, and of regulators. Our role is secondary, but we do anything we can to help these parties in promoting proper application around the world. At the same time, it is also clear that the risk of improper application around the world can never be a reason to not pursue global accounting standards. Even an unevenly applied global standard provides much more global comparability than an equally unevenly applied multitude of diverging national standards. And in fact, what we see, for example, in Europe is extremely interesting in this respect. There is this European securities regulator, ESMA, where all the national securities regulators come together. They come together and compare notes on application of IFRS in their respective jurisdictions. They make very interesting studies. They recently made a study on the application of goodwill impairment in Europe. They came to the conclusion that it is more or less not perfect, let me put it that way, that there is a lot of improvement to do. And they were able to make very good comparisons between countries. In the past, this study could not even have been made because they all spoke different languages. And they could not compare notes. Now they can compare notes, and it is an enormous boost for the improvement of proper application of standards in Europe. So, all in all, the commitments of the G20 and the international organizations, they identify a clear endpoint of a single set of high-quality global accounting standards. The profiles that we publish today provide an indication of the remarkable progress that we have made towards this end. And they also show that deviation from IFRS is rare, while such arrangements are considered to be transitional, with almost all of these topics being addressed by our new agenda. At the same time, these hard-fought gains must be protected. History would not thank us if we allowed a reversal of the progress that we made in the past 12 years. The support of the G20 and the broader international community and of all of you here around the tables must continue to be harnessed in order to complete our work for the benefit of investors to deliver a global language for financial reporting. I thank you for your attention.